The U.S. bombs Iranian nuclear sites, but how will Tehran respond? President Trump came to power pledging not to involve the U.S. in foreign wars, but that's now in tatters. He claims monumental damage was inflicted on all sides and is now even suggesting regime change in Iran. Tehran has launched missiles on Jerusalem, but what other measures could it take? I'm Arijan Ayandar, and today's Newsmaker is Iran. Iran has threatened revenge on the U.S., describing Washington's bunker-busting airstrikes on its nuclear facilities as a betrayal of diplomacy. Tehran vows a decisive response, but does it have the means, and what might that look like? So far, Iran's parliament is looking to suspend cooperation with the UN's nuclear watchdog, and it could try to close the Straits of Hormuz, which would affect the global transportation of oil. But there are also 40,000 U.S. troops posted across the Middle East, and they are now on high alert. Here's a look at the latest developments.
The world woke up to a very different reality in the Middle East over the weekend as American bombs fell on Iran. Following days of Israeli missile strikes on Iran's infrastructure, assassinations of Iranian scientists, and destruction of missile launchers and nuclear facilities, Donald Trump removed any further doubts about American involvement. Several B-2 bombers took off and flew to Iran, targeting 3 Iranian nuclear facilities: Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. The US administration labelled it an incredible and overwhelming success.
Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier.
One of the major targets, Fordow, a facility in the Iranian desert, is a site deep underground. Targeting it required heavy bunker-buster bombs released from high altitude, missiles that drive themselves deep into the ground before exploding on a delayed timer. The US suspects Fordow of being potentially capable of manufacturing a nuclear bomb. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth framing the mission in narrow mission parameters.
We devastated the Iranian nuclear program. But it's worth noting the operation did not target Iranian troops or the Iranian people. For the entirety of his time in office, President Trump has consistently stated for over 10 years that Iran must not get a nuclear weapon. Full stop.
But just because America is saying it's not targeting troops or people in Iran does not mean that Iran sees it that way.
The U.S. military attack on the territorial integrity and national sovereignty of a UN member state carried out with genocidal Israeli regime, carried out in collusion with the genocidal Israeli regime, has once again revealed the extent of the United States' hostility towards the peace-seeking people of Iran, who will never compromise over their independence and sovereignty.
Tehran has vowed swift responses to the US's attacks and launched further missiles on Israel in the immediate aftermath.
Each time the Americans commit a crime, they receive a firm response, and the same will happen this time too.
Despite the US framing the strike as only targeting Iran's nuclear capabilities, mission creep has already set in. The US president hinted that regime change could be an aim as well. But if the US's aim expands to overthrowing a theocracy, it would be a huge gamble. For many in Iran, the current regime isn't popular, but it has been in control since 1979, and any attacks on the country right now could lead to a rally around the flag effect. And on the US front, splits within the Republican Party, as even some staunchly pro-Trump Republicans begin to criticize Trump for breaking campaign promises of not leading the US to war. Iran may not have a large-scale ability to retaliate, beyond sending missiles to American bases in the Middle East. It could close the Strait of Hormuz, interrupting the globe's steady flow of oil. But will the US's actions drive Iran back to the negotiating table? Or could Donald Trump become the very wartime president he boasted he would never become?
Joining me now to debate are from Washington, D.C., Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs and former assistant to former U.S. President Biden, Barbara Leaf. From Isfahan, Iran, Assistant Professor at the University of Tehran, Setara Sadiki. And also from Washington, former U.S. Secret Service agent and sergeant at arms at the Maryland Republican Party, Barry Donadio. Welcome to all of you. Barry, let me begin with you. President Trump ran on an anti-war platform. Do you feel that this strike not only broke that promise, but has escalated the very kind of conflict that he pledged to avoid?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We did vote Donald Trump in to prevent us from being in wars and be a peacemaker. And I do believe that not only Israel, but the Trump administration was very genuine in their attempts to negotiate a peace with Iran and its regime. Something obviously went horribly wrong during that time period around the fifth round of negotiations. I trace it back to the Twitter page of the Ayatollah himself, where he was ranting on and on about how the United States should not do certain things, to behave certain ways, as well as his foreign minister was stating some stuff about how they would attack the United States if they defend Israel. So these statements, the rhetoric probably led to Israel within 24 hours of them, that time period, leading a strike, and then the United States joining in to then again remove the nuclear threat by bombing the nuclear facilities.
Okay. I mean, Setara, I want to bring you in the conversation. Barry said that he genuinely believes that the U.S. administration wanted peaceful negotiations. Do you buy that? I mean, how is this contradiction playing out in Iranian media and public opinion right now?
I mean, it's amazing to think that Trump was for peaceful negotiations or negotiations at all, because Iran and the U.S. had already reached a deal, the so-called JCPOA, or the nuclear deal with Iran. And he not only scrapped that and moved away from it, but he also ordered the assassination of popular Iranian General Soleimani. And the U.S. has carried out terrorist attacks against Iranians in Iraq and Syria. The U.S. has, under both Republicans and Democrats, supported terrorist groups against Iran. The notorious MEK terrorist group has been trained during Bush administration in Nevada to work with Mossad, and that's well before the U.S. delisted them from the list of terrorist organizations. So knowing all of the list of and history of U.S. aggression against the Iranian government and Iranian people, this list of unilateral sanctions that have crippled Iran's economy and affected ordinary citizens shows where any U.S. president, especially Donald Trump, stands when it comes to peace. It looks like Donald Trump has been very committed to making Israel great again, offering unconditional help, serving Netanyahu as if he's Netanyahu is his boss, and he's ordering everything that the U.S. has to do. Okay. I'm sure a lot of Americans wanted to stay out of this war, but seems like Donald Trump was easily bought by his Zionist cabinet and people around him, and he got involved into another war that does not benefit neither Iranian people nor Americans.
Okay, there's a lot to unpack there. Ambassador Leaf, I want to bring you in and touch upon your vast experience. You've worked on both diplomatic as well as military strategies in the region. Do you feel that diplomacy was truly exhausted before this strike, or simply put, was it bypassed altogether?
Well, look, so many things to, as you say, unpack, especially in the last intervention by Dr. Sadiq. I would just say the following. Diplomacy is never exhausted. I think what we saw here was a 2-month sprint of a kind towards an agreement. The president clearly decided to acquire a great deal more leverage for those negotiations. He's continued to say that's ultimately where he wants to go, is a negotiated nuclear deal. So he has acquired considerably more leverage, both through Israeli actions and the U.S. actions against 3 principal sites of Iran's nuclear program. And let me just say, Iran has a long and storied history of terrorism and destabilizing behavior against all of its neighbors and well beyond. And it has continued to undermine security and stability across the region. So, notwithstanding the fact that many countries in the region are deeply concerned about where this military conflict will go, Iran is, as usual, wholly isolated in the region with no sympathy. It had a program that it pursued that gave off all the markings of a gradual creeping approach, and sometimes not creeping, sprinting approach towards a nuclear weapon. Otherwise, why the 60+% enrichment of uranium, which is by no means needed for a civilian program?
Okay, you're mentioning the enrichment percentage. Setara mentioned the JCPOA, and you mentioned the president trying to sort of up his leverage. But I have to ask him, and if the U.S.'s aim was to prevent a nuclear Iran, why not stay in the JCPOA and enforce it? I mean, was this attack a failure of the continuation of the policy, or policy continuity?
Well, look, there's no question that we're at the precipice of, and have been for several years now, the precipice of nuclear crisis as Iran continues to escalate in nuclear terms. There's no question that we would have been better off had the U.S. stayed in the JCPOA, but that is something that was done 7 years ago, the withdrawal. And the question is, where do we go from here? And where does Iran go from here?
Okay, let me ask you that question, Zadar. Where does Iran go from here? I mean, critics would argue that these strikes will only push Iran closer to building a bomb. Do you believe this will harden Iran's nuclear posture, or push it back to a negotiating table?
Well, Israel and the U.S. have been saying that Iran is 1 month away from developing a nuclear bomb for almost 30 years, and it has never happened. The International Atomic Agency has multiple times verified in the past, before it was totally overcome by Zionist agents, that Iran's nuclear activity has been peaceful. Even U.S. officials several times have said that at this point, Iran does not have a nuclear weapon. The state in the region that does have nuclear weapons and has been carrying a genocide campaign against other nations and an ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, but also Lebanese, is Israel. Israel also has the largest stockpile of nuclear weapons and has attacked unprovoked and calling it preemptive attacks against Iran, against Lebanon, against Palestine. It's while we're speaking, Israel is killing civilians in Palestine and in Iran, but nobody talks about how Israel poses a threat to the stability in the region. Iran and the U.S. at some point worked together to repel ISIS, even though we know how Clinton files and showed the U.S. involvement in supporting and funding terrorist groups, including Al-Qaeda and ISIS. So history is there, and people can read those files and they can go back. And but what is happening with Iran, with the U.S. and Israel attacking nuclear facilities in Iran, is a growing public demand for a reconsideration of a famous fatwa, which is a religious decree against the making and using of nuclear weapons. That has been Ayatollah Khamenei's ruling that based on Islamic rulings, we're not allowed to develop and use nuclear weapons. But now people, because they see they have the Iranian government tried all paths of diplomacy and they have been betrayed. We were 2 days away from the sixth round of negotiations with the regime of Trump, and Israel started bombing us and attacking us. So it has become clear to the Iranian people that the U.S. is not serious about negotiations, and the whole negotiations and the indirect talks have been actually a cover-up to prepare Israel for an aggression. And now they're demanding that maybe we should reconsider that fatwa and start having a nuclear weapon, because if we had a nuclear weapon, maybe Israel would not dare attack us the way they are doing it now.
Let me follow up with you, Sitra. I mean, do you feel that this bombing has given the Iranian government more legitimacy domestically?
Absolutely, because Israel is not attacking the Islamic Republic. Israel is attacking Iranian people, Iranian citizens. 90 million people living in a country that is 75 times bigger than the occupied territories under control of Israel. So people understand that even if they have grievances against their government, they understand that this aggression is not against the government, but against the people, and civilians are being killed and punished for supporting their establishments.
Barry, let's bring you back in the conversation. Setara was mentioning, this is all a plan to make Israel great again. President Trump has hinted that at regime change, he's even thrown out slogans like "Make Iran Great Again." In your experience, do you feel that regime change can actually be a stable endgame here?
Yeah, I think this is all about making Israel safe again and the Middle East safe again. We all have to ask ourselves, do we really want the Iranian supreme leader to have a nuclear weapon? I would say no. And as far as regime change goes, it's my analysis that the first top priority is to remove the nuclear threat, prevent Iran from being able to use nuclear materials and weaponize them in any way, shape, or form, or at least set them back so many years. Now, what I forecast is that this regime will collapse. Most of their high generals, their leadership, have already been taken out by Israeli strikes. I expect to see more, and I even think that the Supreme Leader himself is also on the target list, as well as many other targets. When there is a regime collapse, I fully expect the exiled prince of Iran, who's in the United States, to be placed into power under a new regime, and then the people of Iran will form its own government led by the people and not an Ayatollah.
Ambassador Leaf, I want to get your response to what Barry said. He described this operation as not making Israel great again, but Israel safe again. I mean, do you feel that there's any historical example where this kind of external military pressure has led to peace?
Well, let me comment first on another point.
Sure.
I think with all due respect, I disagree with Barry's assessment. I listened very carefully to what the president said night before last, and then what Secretary of Defense Hegseth and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs General Kane said yesterday, echoed by Vice President Vance. All of them have been at some pains to stipulate that this was a set of strikes that were narrowly focused on the nuclear threat, and the nuclear threat not just to Israel, but also to the United States and globally. The nearing nuclear threat. So yes, I saw the president's social media posting. I don't think that's the uppermost issue in his mind or the administration's direction. Rather, to compel a resumption of negotiations that will end definitively the threat to the region and globally from this threshold state status of Iran, where it would take a very short period of time for the Iranian regime to make to sprint towards weaponization. And as to your second question, whether regime change brings peace, that depends really on circumstances and whether the public is behind such a thing. It's the rare case that I've seen that an external power can foster what I would call regime creation. So you can take down a regime. It's quite another thing to replace it with a government that is acceptable to the public. So I don't think that is the main game here. I can't speak for Israeli aims. I don't think that's the principal aim of the U.S. efforts.
Let me ask you about what a possible response from Iran would look like, because you've dealt directly with Iran as well as its proxies. I mean, how do you expect Tehran to sort of calibrate its response? I mean, do you think it'll be regional? Do you think it'll be covert or outright military?
I would lean towards the assessment that the regime will take its time because its own array of tools that it's used in the past are so depleted. They're depleted by last year's strikes by Israel and then by the current campaign. So it has a diminished reservoir or arsenal of ballistic missiles. It has very limited means to do the disruption of Gulf commercial traffic or cutting off the Strait of Hormuz as it is threatened to do. It could turn to terrorism. It could just turn to cyber attacks. I'm less concerned that I might have been if this were 3 or 5 years ago. There would be a high probability that the regime would turn to strikes through its proxies or directly itself, but generally through its proxies on U.S. forces.
I mean, Barry, there are about 40,000 U.S. troops across the Middle East. I mean, if Iran hits back, is the country prepared for retaliation in Iraq, Syria? I mean, even across the wider Gulf. I mean, according to you, what happens next?
What happens next is all the United States forces in the region, which will end up being probably about 3 aircraft carriers, with all that aircraft will lead an overwhelming air campaign against the Iranian regime and its military assets. And I would not even be surprised if Israel does some kind of a ground assault to make sure some of these nuclear facilities are gone. Although daring and unexpected, I would expect to see that. Also, Iran could also do something very bolden by launching a ballistic missile, even towards the United States, fully knowing that it'll be shot down, but just as an act of emboldenedness and showing the world the credibility that they will strike anyone in return for anybody attacking them. So anything's possible, like your other guest said. Terrorism is what they do best. That is probably what they will be doing. We heard of a church bombing in Syria. I connect that to them just due to the timing.
Setara, I got to get you in this conversation and get your response.
Well, I think American officials need to educate themselves about countries that they're attacking, at least. I mean, Marco Rubio was asked how many people live in Iran, and he had no clue about the population. He does not know that his government is targeting plus 90 million people, a country that has lived for thousands of years, and unlike Israel, has not lived on theft, land, and occupation, and through a colonial project. I really want to ask your audience and people who are supporting this campaign, when has the U.S. managed to bomb a country into democracy? Do you really think if you start bombing civilians, the next day they are liberated, and maybe it's instead of wearing this form of headscarf, which they choose, they will start wearing bikinis and then they are liberated? Is that liberation to you, bombing hospitals and civilians? That's exactly what Israel has been doing with the support of the U.S. And you think Iran or Israel can do it, or Iran is not capable of responding back. But why is it that the U.S. had to sacrifice and had to spend U.S. taxpayers' money and come to help Israel to attack Iran? Does that tell you, give you an idea of what the power dynamics here. Also, I think a lot of Americans have been paying the price for supporting Israel unconditionally. They deserve better lives. Americans deserve their politicians to reflect their opinions. Americans voted for Trump because he said he would want to stay out of more wars. But what we're seeing is that Trump is ready to see body bags coming home only because he wants to please Netanyahu and the Israeli lobby that works there. So and look at what the U.S. did in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Libya, and Syria. It's amazing how now the U.S. claims that they've liberated Syria and they have an Al Qaeda terrorists on the U.S. terrorist list previously, running the country, now attacking Christians and other minorities, and you think Iran is doing that?
Okay,
I live in a city where we have at least 11 active churches and different synagogues. I have Jewish and Christian friends here, and we live together, and we have Jewish representatives in our government. So I think it's very important for U.S. officials to educate themselves about countries that they want to attack. Maybe they will be more successful in their future
I would love to
plans.
continue the conversation, but unfortunately we have run out of time. Satara Sadiki, Ambassador Barbara Leaf, and Barry Donadio, thank you very much for joining us here on the Newsmaker. And thanks for watching. You can follow us on social media and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Alijan Ayandash, and we'll see you next time.